That's the fun part where I just watch the front end of YouTube to see if we actually show up on there.
I think we'll be good to go. It seems like it's pretty quick.
Yeah. Not yet. Not yet. Soon. There it is. Nice. I see us. All right. Good deal. Good to see everybody here today. We have a bunch of people already waiting for the stream, which is super exciting. If you would, as always with these live streams, if you would let us know if you can hear and see things okay, I'll let Jonathan talk too to make sure you can hear him.
My son always says, check 1, 2, check 1, 2.
There you go. Mic check.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
he's on Discord with his friends, and I hear him being like, check 1, 2, check 1, 2.
Right. Man, kids streaming. That's
I know, it's so crazy. It's like they'll be leaving school and they're like, are you getting on tonight?
Yeah.
So funny. I remember doing the exact same thing though.
I know. I'm still at a point though where I have more YouTube subscribers than my kid or any of my kids' friends, so I can still one up them with my 5,000 something subscribers. But pretty soon they'll all have more than me, and then I won't have that cool factor anymore. Not that it's cool now, but
that's hilarious. Yep.
Yeah. Every once in a while, Owen will tell his friends that his dad has a YouTube channel. So,
and then they're like, they go look it up and they're like, WordPress?
Yeah,
why are they not gaming?
They're super disappointed.
I would be pretty disappointed too, to be fair.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so it looks like, yep, here and see you both. Adam says, good morning, Adam. Sam says everything's good. Paul's in here. He says it's good. All right, Garrett, boom. Everybody's looking forward to this. Well, awesome. Well, we won't keep you too much longer here. I want to kind of set this up a little bit, but first, before we do that, I definitely want to give Jonathan a huge shout out here for jumping on with me for this live stream today. I had originally planned on just doing like a normal video on this, and I've really struggled on how to do that. So I've used Jonathan as my lifeline here. He came as the perfect candidate because he knows a little bit about what I've done with this, but not a ton. But Jonathan has an awesome course on GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. So I put a link down to that in the description down there. There's both an affiliate link and a non-affiliate link. You grab whichever one you feel best about. But I say that because I know Jonathan knows GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks so well that I can have this conversation with him. He'll understand what I'm talking about, but I think he'll also be able to do a really good job of like asking questions for the audience and making sure I'm explaining things well, or pushing back on maybe some of the things I'm doing that he probably wouldn't recommend. There's probably a good amount of that in there too. So hopefully this will be a nice conversation on all this. And I guess if anybody's here that hasn't met Jonathan yet, Jonathan, why don't you give us a little intro?
Hello. Thanks for having me on as always. Real quick, I want to shout out Torben in the chat. He's a PyCalendar Pro customer and has reached out a couple of times. Awesome. Left us a review and actually translated it for us on the repo, which was amazing. So my name is Jonathan Jernigan. I run a small custom kind of white label WordPress development agency on one side, and kind of the other half of the business is I do some course creation, and my buddy Elijah Mills and I created a plugin called PyCalendar. So that's been the main focus of my time lately, even though it's not paying the bills. We both love it. So we're spending a lot of time on that. But it's just been a really fun exercise to do something that's within the wheelhouse of the day-to-day jobs for both of us, but not client work. So it just feels like invigorating and exciting. So
well, I think y'all are doing a good job of playing the long game on that. You know, you're bootstrapping it. You're working on this like in your extra time. You know what I mean? So it's super cool. I've been playing with it this week. I have a really cool use case for it that I'm trying to get up and running right now. So I spent a bunch of time in PyCalendar today. And if you guys haven't checked that out, it's super cool. Like I've have several client sites where we needed like event type setups. And I've always ended up going with just like a custom post type, and like there's some real drawbacks to that. But I really did that because I didn't want to use any of those event plugins out there because they're like, first of all, they're huge and they kind of have to be because there's so many different considerations that could be made in there. But then I end up with like tons of features that I never need or never use, or the way they name things probably doesn't make sense in my context or whatever. So I've always gone the custom route, but I've been really hampered by not having calendars and things that I can use. So I think PyCalendar is such a cool implementation of this because you can just basically take your custom post type and flip a button, and then boom, you got a calendar with everything on there. So
yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I'm going to go ahead and clip that and post it on the channel as a testimonial. So thanks.
It was like Beetlejuice. Elijah just showed up in the comments. I think I said PyCalendar 3 times, and here he is. All right. Well, sweet. Let's jump in here now that we got everybody warmed up and everything. I guess I've outlined this a little bit. So before I start sharing a screen, I just want to kind of set a baseline on some of these things, because part of this is just the names, the words we use to explain things, or the process we have for things could be a little bit different. So I guess we'll start this by talking about like, what is a starter site? I guess at its base level, it's essentially a WordPress install that you've pre-configured to get up and running with all the default things you need inside your site. So this could be the default plugins you always use. I always use Generate Press and Generate Blocks, so you could preload that on a website. Different configurations, like I know in my past starter sites, the first thing I would go do is like change the time zone to my time zone so everything lined up properly. So essentially it's a time saver, so that when you want to start a new project, you don't have to start from a fresh, completely vanilla WordPress install. You start from one that's kind of been pre-configured to your needs. Is that basically the understanding you have of it, Jonathan?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, just like you, I've gone through evolutions. It used to be spinning up from the ground up every single time, which obviously was a massive waste of time. And then just doing small things, like you said. Your other starter site video is still part of how I do mine. Just basic plugin installs, making sure that the things are up to date. WordPress is up to date. So when you hop in, Generate Blocks and Generate Press are already installed, and you already have the features turned on that you need, and you can just get right to building. So yeah, really for me, it's just leapfrogging, getting to the point where you can start building your content immediately, rather than fiddling with settings and changing time zones and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know some other people call this like a blueprint site, which I think some of the hosting companies kind of have it set up that way as like a blueprint. I think that's actually a really good name for it. But I think I was introduced to this idea by Dave Foy way back in the day, and he called it a starter site. So that's what I've always called it as well. So
I was
all
going to
right, so
mention,
go ahead.
I was going to say that GridPane as the host has a really interesting feature that I don't really use because it's not quite there, but it has this thing called bundles, and you can create groups of like themes and plugins and stuff that you can install. So, maybe you work with an e-commerce client and they need this suite, and then, your standard small business site just needs Generate Press and Blocks and a few others. And it's pretty tricky to get working if the plugin is not already in the repo. But I thought that idea, if they just made that a little bit easier, if it could do a little bit more, and maybe it's just operator error, maybe I just don't fully understand how it works. But I did see that and was like, man, that's really cool. And
yeah, there's something similar inside InstaWP where you can do that too. You can pick like bundles of software to pre-install on new installs, which is pretty cool.
I cut you off though. Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. So yeah. So I guess the purpose of doing this is so you speed everything up, right? You don't have to spend all that time reinventing the wheel each time. And I think my first starter sites were literally just that: just install plugins, install themes, ready to go, ready to clone or whatever. And what I've done this time is, for this, every year, kind of like WordPress does, I want to start a new, fresh theme for myself, because I learned so much in a year. Like my workflow has changed so much year after year that I kind of feel like I need to start over. And for this year's starter site for myself, or the upcoming year, I've actually changed a lot of things inside there. I guess the last thing before we jump in and start looking at it is like logistically, how do you actually set up starter sites? So for me, I'm hosting client sites in Cloudways. I'm doing most of my development in either Cloudways or InstaWP. But for Cloudways, I just have my starter site sitting there as an install that I don't touch unless I'm updating the starter site. And whenever a new project comes along, I just go over there, hit the clone button, clone that install. 2 or 3 minutes later, everything's up and running. So is that kind of what you do as well?
Exactly the same. Yeah. Nothing different. Just in GridPane. That's all.
There you go. All right, so let's dive in here and take a look. So I think there's a lot of things I want to try to go through in here, but we're gonna have to be conscious of time as well. So I'm gonna try to stick us and my screen on the screen for a little bit. We'll make sure all that works. All right, so I think let's just start here with the basics. Like I said, kind of the basics is themes and plugins here. So I'm gonna go into the dashboard, and first I guess we can look at appearance themes. So
real quick,
yeah,
to make sure we're on the same page, the point you're at right now would be client has signed the contract, project is a go, and you've cloned this. I mean, this is your starter site, obviously, but you're about to clone this to be their install, right?
Yeah. So basically, once I clone the starter site, this would become the client's new website, right? This is the starting point. Just like if you installed like the button, one click install to install WordPress, that's what I'm doing, except when I install WordPress, this is what it looks like essentially. So yeah, that's the point we'd be at. And I guess worth mentioning too, I do have comments pulled up here. I think Jonathan can see them as well. So if you have questions or if there's like something we're not explaining well, go ahead and drop that in the comments and we'll try to catch those as we're going so we can answer them kind of in real time as we're talking about those things. So I do set up everything with a child theme. I think I've gone back and forth on that. I think when I first learned about like this code snippet type plugins, I thought, okay, well, there's not really a reason to have a child theme if you can insert all these snippets in other ways, right? So the idea before with the child theme is you put in all your tweaks and code and everything, and the updates to the parent theme won't override that. Well, a snippet plugin works the same way, and you don't have to mess with the child theme. But I've always kind of liked the idea of a child theme because I can brand it a little bit. It looks nice. Like if a client looks at their website and ends up clicking on themes, they see that this is the Ogle 2024 theme. It has my name on it. It links to my website and all that. So I do go the child theme route and have for quite a while now. What about you, Jonathan?
I do not actually. But conversely, like I mentioned, I do a lot of white label work for other agencies, and their end clients are typically not getting into the site, or if they are, they're reasonably technical and they're not going to be fooled by something like this,
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of fooling people necessarily, but I personally prefer the code snippets route, despite the fact that I know Adam Lowe's going to come for me. Sorry, but
yeah. So I actually did both for a long time. Like I had the child theme that had like all the starter site stuff in it, and then I had code snippets installed where I would add little one-off things. I do like the convenience of like toggle this on, toggle this off, which is great inside code snippets. But then after that, there was kind of some drama around should we use those snippet plugins on production sites. I don't know the answer well enough to speak intelligently on that, but I just decided I'm using a child theme anyway, so I could just stick all this in my child theme, not have the code snippets plugin on there. Hopefully I'm saving that security aspect of it, but I know I'm putting one less plugin on the website as well, so that's fine with me.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, the ability to toggle the snippets on and off in the plugin is really handy, and then also the ability to put whatever code you want exactly where you want. You can just use the built-in controls to insert that code in your header, or your footer, opening body tag, or on your login page or whatever. That stuff is really handy to me. So I still go that way really because it's just a matter of like, I have all my other ducks in a row in terms of good hosting, good security plugins, and I don't do crazy things that would open up security holes. So in my personal case, I think using using a code snippets plugin is not that big of a deal, especially
I love how careful you're being with that.
Well, it's like I know people feel so strongly about this, but I don't know. That's kind of the thing. It's like we're right now we're really digging into your business and your methodology,
Sure.
and everyone's going to have a differing opinion probably about every single thing we talk about today.
For sure. I'm going to go ahead here in this generate press doc. I'm going to go ahead and put this as a comment inside the comments. Hopefully that will come through. They have the option here to download a completely blank child theme. So if you've not used a child theme before, you can go to this help doc, click this button. It will download a zip file. You can upload that file to your website just as you would any other theme, and you're good to go. But typically what I'll do is open up that child theme inside of VS Code or something so I can do all my edits and everything in there. But you're able to replace the screenshot, things like that, rename it, say who the author is. All those things are pretty straightforward if you've never done it before. You can even Google, all those questions you might have. It's kind of hard to break. So that's what I do as far as the theme stuff. In the plugins, I've really slimmed this down. I don't know, maybe at the beginning of this year, I did a post inside the group saying like what all plugins are you using by default inside of your installs. And I've slimmed this down to 8. So I have Perf Matters deactivated here on my starter site because sometimes any of those like performance type things, I don't want those getting in the way of me trying to debug issues or whatever while I'm developing. So caching and all that I'm turning off during development, and Perf Matters as well. But yeah, I'm down to just 8. So I use the Postmark plugin for all my SMTP stuff. If you pre-configure this inside of your starter site and clone it, it seems to work really well, and I don't have to go back and reset up like the API key and everything, so that works well. Advanced Custom Fields Pro, plenty of use cases for that, and we'll see some of those today. Block visibility probably wasn't in my starter site at the beginning of this year and has definitely earned its spot because I find so many places to use that. Fluent Forms, because I got an LTD to it a long time ago and I've had no reason to change. So there it is. It's right there. Generate Press, Generate Blocks, pro versions of all that. Jaden just asked about an SEO plugin in here. So that's a good question. I've actually probably for over a year now just put Slim SEO on all my websites. And I've backtracked a little bit on some bigger projects where there just wasn't enough stuff inside Slim SEO, and I needed to go back to SEO Press. So what I decided to do is just not put either of those in my starter site and then just install whichever one makes sense for the project. So if it's a small mom and pop local business, we're not doing a bunch of SEO work, I'm just going to install Slim SEO. You can get it from the repo. It's totally free. I'll install that and we're good to go. If it's going to be a bigger project, a bigger company, they're doing SEO work, any of those kinds of things, I have been going back to SEO Press for that.
I encountered the same thing. I was trying to remember specifically what it was that Slim SEO didn't do, but it was something where I was just like, oh man. One thing was I needed to no index a whole post type, and that proved to be pretty difficult. I had to use it like a custom function that they provide. Just like, why is this not built in? That seems, I mean, I know it's a free plugin, but it seemed like something that's like fairly common to do. Maybe not, but
yeah, actually, Pete Everett and Jeffrey Patch, just they're from SEO Hive. They just started an SEO podcast. It's the WP SEO show. Really good. You should go check it out if you haven't. They were talking about this the other day. They were talking about, I guess Pete uses SEO Press as well. And he was talking about Slim SEO, and like one of the things that he downloaded it and was trying to use it. And one of the things he was complaining about was you couldn't edit the robots.txt file. And when he asked them about it, they gave him, the workaround to go do it through code or through adding it this way or that way. And he's like, shouldn't that really be in the plugin? But I think that is the premise of Slim SEO. Like, it's slim. It just has the basics in it. So it like, while I would probably maybe do things tiny bit differently, it does feel kind of like, okay, well, you downloaded this plugin because you didn't want a whole lot in there, and then now you want us to add more stuff in there. You know what I mean? So
here I am complaining about this, having developed a calendar plugin that intentionally does less than other calendar plugins. So right. I forget all of what I just said.
That's true. And Garrett in the comments here, he said rank math is worth the cost. Yeah, I just never really liked the interface of Rank Math. And again, like, I got an SEO Press lifetime deal and it does everything I need it to do. But I did buy Rank Math, the pro version, and test it out on quite a few sites. I just never got along with the UI that well.
I spent so many years as a subscriber of the WP MuDev. I don't even know if that's how you say it. Their suite of like Smart Crawl was their SEO plugin, and they had a bunch of other stuff like a dashboard thing. And I used Smart Crawl for a long time, but then once Slim SEO came, that's been my go-to, because most of the time I don't need more than that.
Yeah. All right, so that pretty much covers the basics of what's in here. Obviously, I set like the time zone and things like that. But I want to get into next. One of the huge upgrades for this starter site is basically building in a design system into the starter site. So I relied heavily on, I was very influenced by like the aesthetic of Tailwind, just because I think Tailwind sites look nice. I know people will complain that they all look kind of generic, but for a starting point, it's a great starting point. So we can go kind of look at the front end, I guess, as a starting example here. So basically out of the box, I've already set up some typography settings. I've set up a color system, which we'll get into a little bit here after a while, some buttons and some like default settings for those, section padding, widths of containers, modal, something a little bit different we can get into here. But basically what I wanted to do was theme this out a little bit more so that a completely vanilla install of my theme would look fairly decent. And I tried to put this to use pretty quickly. Here recently, you guys might know that I released this product called Agency Copilot. This basically uses my starter site with as few tweaks or design changes as possible. Like I just used the base typography that was already set in there. I changed the like action color to this blue color, but everything else was default out of my theme. Like all the buttons, the search styles, like all of this stuff was just basically the way my website would look straight out of the box, which I think looks a whole lot nicer than just installing GeneratePress and activating the theme and what that looks like straight out of the box.
Most definitely.
So yeah, like I said, inside of there are the typography system, which I'd like to dive into specifically, which I guess we can go there next. So I think typically if you're using GeneratePress, you would go in here to the customizer and go to typography and start adding all your fonts in that way. And what
Interesting.
what you can see here is I've basically done none of that.
I am very intrigued.
Yeah, so this is one that I've been really wanting to make a video on, but I'm very much struggling with like the teaching aspect of it. Plus, I stole so much of these ideas from other people. It would be like 10 minutes of me just giving credit before I explain anything. So shout out to everyone who's done anything on typography on the internet because I've stolen something from you. So essentially, all I'm using the customizer for is to enqueue fonts into my theme. So there's kind of two settings here inside this typography panel. There's the font manager where you actually bring fonts in. And then there's the typography manager where you go set styles for fonts. So I'm using the font manager to enqueue fonts into my site. So on this base site, I just have the font enter in here. But if I was wanting to add another font, I would just go in here and I would actually add fonts through this interface. And then I'm setting the fonts for basically my body and for my headings here inside the customizer as well. I could do that in the code, which we'll look at here in a second, but I just found it was really quick and easy to do this inside here. But as far as like going in here and saying, okay, now my H1s are going to, I'm going to set all these settings here. I'm not doing any of that inside the customizer. I'm doing all of that inside my child theme with CSS.
It's actually a really, honestly, kind of a big pain in the ass to do all of these. And then if you realize you made a mistake or you need to come change it, you got to do it to every single one. That's why I'm so intrigued by this. I'm like, wait a second, I didn't know you're doing this. So
okay, so let's talk about it. So there's a couple of reasons why, like, I don't like circumventing systems that much. And that's probably like a bold thing to say, considering everything I'm showing you today is me circumventing systems. However, if I could rely on like the default UI to do everything, I would prefer to go that way rather than hack the system and do it my own way. However, there's a couple reasons why I just don't think it's the best way. So number one being, I want to use clamp for all my font sizes. And you can't put clamp values inside the customizer here. So if you're not familiar with clamp, what I would suggest is just Google clamp calculator here. There's a bunch of them. You can click on any of them. Look, Kevin's even got one. So we'll give a shout out to Kevin here. A clamp function essentially lets you set the biggest size something's going to be on desktop. This is general. Generally, it's going to be bigger on desktop. And then the smallest it's going to be on mobile devices, right? So in terms of fonts, we would say, okay, the smallest value I ever want this to be is 1 rem. And the biggest I ever want it to be is 2.5 rems. So in the customizer, you're setting desktop size, tablet size, mobile size. And as you hit all those breakpoints, your fonts jump down to whatever those sizes are or jump back up, right? But with clamp, actually what it's doing is using math to like fluidly scale between these two values you set. So you set your minimum value and your largest value, and then clamp is going to automatically scale these in between them. So we can actually look at this on the front end here. I go into my inspector. It might be hard to see because these fonts aren't drastically different sizes, but as I start bringing the size of this in, you can see my headlines are getting smaller. So essentially it's looking at that clamp value for the biggest size and the smallest size. What's great about this and why I would go to the trouble of writing all the code for this rather than just put all the defaults in the customizer the way it comes is basically you get to say goodbye to media queries for all your fonts. So you don't have to set a desktop, a tablet, a mobile. You set one size as clamp value, and it's going to take care of all the responsive settings for it. So for me, that's like a huge benefit to going with clamp over just static values essentially in the customizer.
That's massive. That's something I'm going to rob from you immediately.
Yeah. All right. So that's point number one for me. The other point here is I really want to set all of my font sizes as variables. So this goes to another maybe teaching moment we have to do here. So if you're not used to CSS variables, you've actually been using them inside of Generate Press this entire time. Well, for quite a while now, not the entire time, but for quite a while. When you set up your colors inside Generate Press here, you go in here and you put in a hex value. If you didn't know, you can also drop like HSL and RGB and everything else into this little field here in case you didn't know that. That's a nice little hack. But when you do that, you give that variable, you give that color a name. And essentially what this system is doing is creating CSS variables for you. So I've just basically said, anytime I say the words contrast alt, what I mean is this hex code. And that's the way variables work. You're basically given, as Kevin always says, a token to some kind of value. So we're saying, okay, the token is contrast alt. That's kind of a weird name. So maybe we just go with primary. That's an easy token to remember. Anytime I say use my primary color, what I mean is use this color right here. And it's a nice way to like theme things out and to be able to stay really consistent across your website. So you're not grabbing a hex color and hard coding this same hex color all over your website. You're just referencing this one place where it's set, this token here. And now if you ever need to change it in the future, you come back to the customizer, change it here, and it updates everywhere across the site. Does that make sense?
100%. Yep. That was great.
Okay. So there's actually there's a ticket in the GitHub repo, and it's been in there for a while. I can't remember who put it in there. It might have been Sam Lomelli that put it in there. But basically, to set the typography in here, instead of setting these as static values in here, to map all of these into CSS variables. And I've upvoted that. And if I go find, I'll try to Google that at some point and put that in the video description. You can upvote it as well, because it's something that like, maybe if you're not more developer minded, you wouldn't think this is a big deal. But if they would reroute all of the settings here inside the customizer to variables, then we could use those variables in other places. So the reason this is so valuable to me, and the second reason why I do all of this inside of CSS rather than put it inside the customizer, is I'm actually mapping all these clamp values to CSS variables. So for instance, my H1, instead of putting a hard value just on the H1 element inside of my document, I'm actually saying, okay, this is the clamp value for this token, which is FS headline H1. I might rename these, but for now, that's what it is. And then I'm mapping those variables to different elements. So things like my headings or different like utility classes I've set up. Basically, what this means is now I have one place I can use typography across my entire website, but I have one place I can go change it, which is right here. The other valuable part this gives you is if we jump into this website, this is the reason I started this in the first place. Is like I often run into these scenarios where I need to use an H2 semantically. Like the way this page is structured, this has to be an H2 heading. But in the context of this design, an H2 is way too big. So what do you do at that point? If you just drop an H2 heading in here, it's going to be the size you've told your H2s to be. And if you need it to look like one of your H3s, what do you do? Well, I think most people would just go into the typography panel here and then set whatever font size their H3 is, or set a random number that looks good with their design. The problem with that is you completely lose control of any kind of like theme or consistency across your site when you do that. What I've done by mapping all of this to CSS variables is essentially now I can go on this headline too. I can use my global styles and I can say, okay, but make it look like an H3. So now this is still semantically an H2, but because I've created styles that map these to the variables, it's making it look exactly like my H3 does. So it gives me the ability to take an H2 and make it look XXL, or I could make it look small, or I could make it look just like my body font. I can make it look like a tiny body font, but it still be an H2. So it gives me the ability to separate the HTML from the CSS So basically like the structure from the design in a way that makes websites so much more consistent, I would say. So I know I've really struggled with trying to explain this, so I'm sure that was kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I was following you until you just turned on the global style thing. So for
Okay.
those of you that aren't familiar with it, we've been talking about the theme of generate press, but that use global styles is from the plugin generate blocks. So I'm curious how that connection with this right here, this code,
Okay.
ties
Yeah,
in.
and there's kind of a step in there that I kind of purposely left out, but obviously that's confusing. So I'm going to grab this H3 variable here, and I'm going to show you what I probably should have showed you first. Instead of me going to that global style, I could just go, we'll even say on this H1, right? It's set as an H1. It's defaulting to all its H1 styles. I could go into this font size and type in VAR and then open parentheses and paste in that variable, which is FS headline H3. And I'm basically saying, okay, for the font size, don't make it 40 pixels or 3 rem or the values you'd be used to. Make it this variable that I set up. Just reference that variable. Just like if I said, make this my primary color, all I'd have to do is type in primary here, and then it would go look at my code and say, what is that word primary referencing, right? So I'm doing the same thing with fonts here. I'm just saying, hey, reference this style. Now, what you saw me do with the global styles is I've taken that a step further. Like, I like this. I like being able to put the var in there and do all that, but it's a lot of stuff to remember, right? Like now I have to remember all the variables I set up. So you could do this a couple ways. You could set up utility classes. So I could go in here and make a bunch of classes that say like looks H2 or H3 or H4 or whatever. And I've done that in some cases. But what I ended up doing for my starter site here is going into the global styles, which, like you said, is part of Generate Blocks Pro. And inside my typography here, I just put in a bunch of headings. Okay. When you do that, when you add something here inside of the global styles, what it does over here is gives you the option to create a label, which is like what you see in that drop-down menu. And then it's showing you here what class it's actually giving that, because what it's doing behind the scenes is assigning a class. A global style is basically a class. So what I've done is just unlock, when you default put one in here, if I just put in a new heading, it would say in here, GB headline dash 8BA6. I'm never going to remember all that, right? So I just unlock that. And as long as you do this before you've used it anywhere, it's pretty safe. And I would just call this Jonathan, right? So I've renamed that class. So you can see inside of I've done that for basically all my H2s, all my H3s, all my heading levels, all my body fonts and all that. What I've done in here is use comma separation. Maybe I can
that's better.
this. I basically said, okay, for my H1s and for anything that has a class GB headline H1, reference this token I use, reference this CSS variable. So I've used this CSS to kind of override what's here inside the global styles, but I've just basically used Generate Blocks' system to hook into the classes they create for you. So that gives me the ability, like you saw a minute ago, to just grab any headline and then choose from my pre-made styles, right? I don't want to ever go in there and just hard code a random value into the font size and just say, hey, maybe this looks good at 13 pixels or 1.125 rem, because then nothing's consistent across the site. So I basically come up with a system, and come up with is a loose term I've stolen from a lot of other smart people and like put it together in a way that makes sense for me. I have all my headings, heading sizes like H1 through H6. I have an XL one, which is actually bigger than my H1. And then I have body sizes, my default body size, an XL, an L, a small, and an extra small. So that's kind of like my system that I have in here that's baked in. And that should cover 100% of use cases of any time I need to change a font size in here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. I've totally followed now. So it gives you full flexibility to set any heading level and any visual size.
Right. Because, me and Pete did a video a long time ago about like heading levels. And we just went to a bunch of random websites and found that most people are just using heading levels for styling and not for semantic structure in their document, which is bad for accessibility. It's bad for SEO. It's improper. I don't know, we can debate how terrible of a sin it is, but it's not the right way to do it, right? So if you can separate those things, you're going to be better off, and that's what this system does. So of all the things I put into my child theme, this little bit of CSS here for all the typography stuff has probably taken me the longest and gone through the most amount of iterations. But and it does look like a lot of work, and it was a lot of work. But because this is all mapped back to variables, when I create a new site and let's say these font sizes don't work for the new design, the only thing I have to change are these right here. And then the rest is all going to work itself out because it's all been done, like it's all been programmed into the site. So I never have to go back and change all this other stuff. I never have to go back into the global styles and change those on a one-off basis. I just change what's inside here, and then it updates everywhere across the entire website.
Yep, that's really cool. I like that a lot.
All right. Hopefully that made sense. I don't see a bunch of questions coming in through here. So either people have already bailed on us or it made sense.
A little bit ago, I think it was Torben or somebody. Yeah, he said, I was like, I'm confused. And he said, it makes perfect sense.
Okay. He was just trying to show up on you for there.
Definitely.
All right. So that's essentially the typography system. Like I said, I would love to do a dedicated video on this if I could ever figure out a way to explain it in a way that's clear. Actually, Dave Foy just did a presentation as part of the Page Builder Summit this week that kind of explains why you should do something like this. I haven't watched it yet, but I believe that was the topic of it. So if you got tickets to that and you got the pass to go back and rewatch it, I would check out Dave's video because I'm sure he does a great job of explaining all this way better than I would. All right, so let's talk about color system. Color is one of these things that totally drives me mad because I feel like there should be some kind of like default palette I can install and then use on every project, but every project is so different. That's really never the case. Mm-hmm. So this is inside this little page here. I kind of explain some of these things, but color can be really difficult. So what I've done is come up with like a baseline palette that I feel I can use on like 99% of jobs. I just have to add to it rather than take things from it. I don't want to bake anything into this starter site that I then have to go take out later. So that goes back to like the question about the SEO plugin. I could put one of them in there, and then if I have to change it out, delete it, put the other one in. But my idea is like, I don't want anything in here that needs to be taken out later. Like, we should only be adding to this, not subtracting from it. So that's what I've kind of come up with this color system. There's a primary and a primary alt, mostly because I'll often use these for things like buttons or links where I need to have a hover color. So I like having two versions of that color. Same thing with contrast and contrast alt. So it's basically like brand primary, brand secondary, and then surface color. So if I'm doing a light theme site, I'll need about 4 variations of white in there for different things. If I'm doing a dark theme site, I'll need about 4 colors of, blacks in there, and vice versa. If I'm doing a dark site, I need some different colors of white for text and things like that. Or if I'm doing a light site, I need some dark versions of colors for text. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's always been a struggle for me too, because that's exactly what I want. I want there to be a baseline palette that I don't have to touch. But like you said, it's really tough. Sometimes client comes to you and they're like, here's our brand guidelines, and there's 3 colors. And then sometimes there's like 27. Like, yeah, I don't know how to make sense of that.
Yeah, and like I on the admin bar stuff, I have like 10 different shades of gray, essentially from white to black, and then 1 yellow color, and then that's it. You know what I mean? So it's like a completely different palette that wouldn't work in this system either. But I have found like in most cases, I can use this or adapt it slightly and pretty much have job done. Now, this also is a better use case for like the clients that come to you that don't have much branding. There's not already there's not already some kind of design system in place or Figma designs already done. But if I'm just having to start from scratch, like this palette would allow me to build out an entire website pretty easily. That's kind of the idea there.
Definitely.
We missed a question here on the typography stuff. I'll see if I can put it on the screen. Scott said, so if GP supported clamp, you could do it all in global styles. If GP supported clamp inside the customizer and would actually write all those values to CSS variables, then yes, I could do it in the customizer. But that's like 2 things they have to add. I know like I said, there's an issue on GitHub about doing the CSS variables. I don't know how interested they are in doing that. It's probably a lot of rewriting, and it's probably like backwards compatibility issues. I know in the past when they've like completely rewritten systems like that, they've had to go in the customizer and like you have to switch from like the old version to the new version. And I really don't think they like doing that, like if they can help from doing it. So I don't know how likely they are to actually map all the typography stuff to variables. So for now, like I said, all this is in my starter site now, so I never have to write all that code again. I just have to go in there and switch out the font sizes essentially when I do that.
The other thing that struck me about the implementation you have now is if in 2 years or whatever you wanted to transition away from Generate Press and Generate Blocks, it's very conceivable you could do that with. I mean, it would be challenging, but you could do it because the underlying code is still really accessible.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You could transfer that probably easier, or like if somebody were to grab my code here and put it into some other kind of builder, it would probably take very few tweaks to make it work. It's not very like Generate Press specific. Mm-hmm. And then we also have to think too about like full site editing themes, FSE themes eventually. Like I'm still on classic themes and I've not spent much time with FSE, but I imagine I eventually will get pulled over in that direction. So hopefully this kind of system will transfer over there fairly decently.
And the other thing is, I've been spending a little bit of time throughout my weeks in the last 2 weeks or so with building custom blocks in Pinegrow. And the thing that I kept coming back to is like, well, what I need is a system that ties into whatever is already existing on the site. And I've been kind of stuck on how to tie that in, because it's like, well, you can just reference the colors from Generate Press variable, those sorts of things.
Right.
And what I would want is the ability to take that block, put it on any of the sites, and it just work. And so, the system you have in place would allow that to happen.
Yeah, and that's another thing about the color system too, is like if you reuse the same naming convention and the same palette essentially, or the same base palette at least on your sites, you can copy and paste things from one site to another site pretty easily. And then it would inherit whatever you set up as primary and primary alt on this site, it would inherit whatever the colors are over here. So it makes being able to like reuse things pretty awesome too, which is cool. All right, so let's wrap up kind of like the design system / framework part of this by just breezing through what all I have inside of my CSS file here. So I'm gonna add my screen back here. I'm gonna zoom in because I imagine this is kind of small. That looks a little bit better. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. We can actually take our faces out of there too, which would probably help. So
that's better.
Okay, so this was a cool hack. I took all of my CSS code that was inside this child theme and put it inside of ChatGPT and said, hey, can you organize all this and create like categories for it and stuff? I had to work with it a little bit, and sometimes it would stop writing my CSS the way I had it before. So it was a little bit of a nightmare, but it did help me like organize this a little bit better. So it's easier now. Like I know if I need to go find like my CSS grid stuff, I know I can find it in here because it's kind of numbered. So I have some general theme tweaks. This really has to do with me setting like a wrapper on the site, which is something I do. Overriding some of the way the like padding and margins and stuff happen in the default theme. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's some search stuff. One thing we probably won't spend a bunch of time on, Jonathan did a great video on using a modal inside Generate Blocks. It's through a system called Hist modal. So I have some information inside the style sheet for that as well as just the default search modal. I change out my hamburger menu just because, and then we get to basically utility classes. So I use this quite a bit for things that are like where there's not options inside the UI. So let me give you an example. We can't change text decoration to none inside the UI like globally or anything. So I have a utility class, which we'll see in a second, that just turns off the underline to links essentially. So I've tried to limit this to as few as possible because I just don't want a bunch of utilities that I'm never ever going to use. And that's what's kind of like kept me from using some kind of bigger framework, is I have a hang up with having a bunch of stuff that I'm never going to use in here. So I've tried to keep this purposely fairly small. I have one that will visually hide something, which is kind of an accessibility consideration to hide something on the screen visually, but have it still show up inside of screen readers. So sometimes this can be helpful. Like if a screen reader was going through the site, you would need to hear this headline announced for whatever reason for it to make sense. But visually, we don't need it on the website. I can use this visually hidden class on here, or like there's several use cases. Anyways, it comes in handy. This is one that I think I stole from maybe Kevin Powell. Line limits. So often I'll want to do like excerpts or something on a card, and I'd want to limit that not to a character count, because sometimes that can still break at different points. I want to limit it to a certain amount of lines. Like I want to show 3 lines of excerpt or 2 lines. I've done that here with line limits inside CSS, which is nice. Aspect ratios, because on images you can set widths and heights, but you're like hard coding values into it. Here with using the aspect ratio, I can just grab an image, add one of these AR classes. So I can do like AR-16-9, and that will make my image a 16:9 aspect ratio, which these ones I use constantly. Like I'm always using these utility classes. Like I said earlier, no underline. So I just use a no UL class, and that will just take the text decoration off of an underline. Sometimes, like I want to underline links just in the body, but sometimes like in a navigation, you don't want them underlined, or inside of a card, you don't want them underlined. So I just use that as kind of a utility class, an easy way to take the text decoration off. Border radius. This one I probably still need to do some work on. This really doesn't belong in my utility classes, because these are, again, I've just used CSS variables here, but I'm trying to get away from going in there and like hard coding random values into all my border radiuses and having some kind of system. So similar to typography and kind of the way Dave Foy does it, is like t-shirt sizes. So an extra small, a small, a medium, a large, extra large, extra, extra large, a 50%. I don't know why I have both of those here the same. But essentially, just give me a few varying sizes for border radiuses, so I'm picking from a certain set of standard sizes rather than randomly putting values in, if that makes sense. All right.
Make it decision lists, basically.
Yeah, that's the goal. So we went through a lot of the typography stuff in here, so I won't do that again. Fluent Forms, because I'm using that on every project, there are just some like tweaks to it to make it kind of match my baseline styles and my theme. So I've gone through and just styled some of that. They have like some editing styles UI inside their forms, but I've never had any luck with it. So I pretty much always wrote that with CSS. Mike Oliver, I think he has a video on YouTube where he talks about this, and he shares all of his default styles for it. And if you go find that, like just Google Mike Oliver Fluent Forms, I'm sure you'll find it. You can grab all his CSS, and it's a great way to like find all the selectors and stuff you need. All right, and then the last one in here is CSS Grid. So this is one, man, I kind of struggle with this a bit, Jonathan. I'm gonna put us both on here too, because I might have to talk a little bit. I can't wait for CSS Grid to come to generate blocks, and I'm saying that as if it definitely will. I've had hints that it will. I've just found CSS Grid is so much better for a lot of layouts than trying to dick around the flex box. So if I'm just doing like a row of logos or a group of cards or whatever, CSS Grid just behaves so much better and more predictable, and like in so many ways superior to Flexbox. Not that there's not a place for Flexbox. You still have to use Flexbox a ton. But I'm really waiting for Generate Blocks to add CSS Grid in. So for now, I do find myself really wishing I could use it and not having all the controls for it. So I've basically made a bunch of utility classes to be able to put Grid in. So a lot of this was kind of inspired by what Kevin's done inside of Automatic CSS, except mine is like super, super dumbed down. It's nowhere near as comprehensive as what he's done. And my screen's going crazy. So I basically have grid setups from a 2-column grid all the way up to a 6-column grid, because in most cases, that's all I'm ever going to use. And I've just done this all with utility classes where I can just say grid 4, grid 5, grid 6. I've made it as simple as I could. Gap settings, because you don't get, like, you can use gap inside Flexbox and generate blocks, but since we're not actually setting grid inside generate blocks, you don't have the controls for gap. So we have to do that with utility classes as well. And then I've just done it all with media queries here. But essentially, let me just show you kind of what that looks like inside the editor. So I'll quickly just put together a section here, and we'll say inside the section we want like three cards. So essentially I have my wrapper here and then the 3 cards. So to make these CSS grid, I would just go on this wrapper that kind of contains it. I would go down to my additional CSS and I would say grid-3, and that will put this in a 3-column grid. And then I can say gap XL, and that will put an extra large gap in between these 3 columns. So it gives me some flexibility to be able to use CSS grid inside of generate blocks. Like, you could do way more complex things with it. You just have to go write the code every time, right? So this is just giving me some like really simple basics where I can say, hey, here's a 3-column grid or a 2-column grid or a 6-column grid, whatever I need. And then I've wrote media queries to like do my best to guess, okay, if it's a 3-column grid, I'm going to want it 2 on tablet and 1 on mobile. So that's kind of where it defaults. And I just kind of made some like reasonable defaults for all those. And then if I have to override them, I have to override them. But are you using CSS grid at all?
Only not doing it only because of the fact that there's not a native implementation. So
yeah.
I just fight my way through Flex a little bit. And really the reason why I haven't gone this route is just with the fingers crossed that it comes to generate blocks and then I won't have to do anything except just start using it.
Right. When you were using Oxygen, were you using CSS grid much?
In specific circumstances, like if there was any kind of deviation on the grid, if there was the first row was 3 equal parts and then it was 1 wide one and then 3 equal parts, you know, those sorts of things, because of the way that in Oxygen you could click on a specific cell and tell it how many grid columns to span.
Right.
With that, I use that fairly frequently.
Okay.
But then, you know,
I mean,
it's like,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I try to keep things as simple and consistent as possible. So if you logged into the very first generate block site I ever did, it's going to look pretty dang similar to the sites that I'm building these days. And that's actually a really intentional effort on my part.
No, I'm totally with you. I 100% agree. And then I'm over here doing things that seem completely counterintuitive to agreeing with that. I just think, like, I don't know, for like a simple 3-column layout, like grid just works perfectly for it. I don't have to worry about like all the controls inside Flexbox when we can just use grid and be done with it. So I've set these up to give me just some really, really basic starting points for grid. Like I said, it's none of these will like, they're all going to use equal size columns. I'm not going through and doing like, hey, I want the first column to be bigger than the second one. Like, if I wanted to use grid for all that, I would just go write CSS for it, I guess.
Yeah.
But this will give me at least like default, quick and easy layouts I can do with CSS grid.
I mean, that's super fast and way easier than trying to make a Flex layout with 33% and then you add a little bit too much gap and then it collapses to a new line or overflows. It's like, yeah, that's way better. Way, way, way better.
Grid is like, I think it's hard for people to initially wrap their minds around, but then once you do, you're like, oh man, Flexbox is really convoluted to do some of these things. Like, yeah, if you just want to stick 2 items next to each other, Flexbox does a great job of that. But like, if you want to do some kind of big layout where you have all these different cells, it just makes so much more sense inside grid, but you have to wrap your mind around that first. So, all right, should we move on to some templates?
Sure. Sounds great.
You got any questions or?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Anybody else? If you do, I'm keeping an eye on the chat so far. Not any specific questions. Yakovos, hopefully I'm saying his name right, says example of where you are using the grid currently. I think we kind of went over that, right?
Yeah. And so, I mean, if I was doing any kind of column type, like equal column type layout, I'm doing it. A good example is like when you have one of those sections where it's like our partners logos or like clients we work with, and it's like 6 logos next to each other. Like CSS grid just knocks that out instantly. And with the utility classes, I can knock that out pretty quickly. So that's mainly where I'm using it. I'll often just still use the grid block inside of generate blocks, which now Taylor's just said too. I'll often use the grid block out of kind of habit because it's easy and it's right there to grab. And because I can use all the controls inside there. So sometimes it comes down to like, I would have to go write all this CSS with CSS Grid, or I can just use the grid block and I have all the controls there. So it depends.
I still use it for the grid block specifically for things that are just dead simple that I know won't change. But I got really frustrated that it's in some cases where, because the grid element itself is not actually a full-blown container, you don't have all the styling controls. So if you need to make more significant changes, I'm like, well, damn it, now I gotta move this out anyway. So if there's even like a minute possibility that I need to manipulate this in the future to be more complex, then I'm gonna just build it with Flex, or like you said, just write some CSS for it.
And I feel like whenever they wrote that grid block, which was one of the initial like first blocks inside Generate Blocks, like we must have not had like support for gap must have not been there, because the way, if you go inspect the way the grid block, it's using Flexbox. So it's confusing that they call it grid, but it's not using CSS Grid. It's actually using Flexbox. But the way the gaps are set in there, it's like everything has negative margin and then it's pushed over. Like if you go look at all the code in that, it's really freaking confusing. So if you do have to go in there and like manipulate the grid, the Generate Blocks grid block with CSS, sometimes I just throw my hands up. I'm like, I can't do this. I don't understand all that. All right, so let's move on to templates. So trying to think, I might have should have pulled up. I was trying to think of maybe the best way to do this, and now I'm thinking maybe I changed my mind on the fly, but that's probably not a good idea, so we'll not do that. Essentially, when you install a theme, a classic theme at least, and FSC themes too, I guess, it's going to have some templates already built in classic themes and Generate Press. It's going to be PHP templates. You're going to have templates for things like your single post. You're going to have templates for things like your archive. You're going to have templates for your search results. And all of those are fine in Generate Press out of the box. You just install it and they're good to go. But they're using kind of a different system than the rest of my site will be using, because the rest of my site, I'm going to be using container blocks and inner containers. And I've set some default padding and margin. And I've now themed all this stuff out to my own preference, that now all the defaults inside Generate Blocks don't match perfectly. So I'm like, okay, how do I rectify that? And so what I ended up doing was essentially just going in there and creating my own templates for all of those things. So all of those are done inside of Elements here. We can see we have a lot of them in here. Not all of them are like these theme templates that I'm talking about, but we can talk about the ones that are. So 404 is a good example. By default, Generate Press is going to give you a 404 template, and it's fine, and there's nothing wrong with it. But because of the way I've themed some of my stuff out, like for sections, I'm also using Clamp for the padding on the left and right. And Generate Press by default isn't doing that. So to try to get its default padding to match mine is a real pain in the ass. So I've just gone through and made my own default 404 page that uses all of my systems. So it's using the container block. It's using my global styles for padding. It's using the headings that I'm using, all that kind of stuff. So it's a very simple, like there's nothing pretty or brilliant or fascinating about this 404 template, other than now I've mapped it directly to the rest of all of my theming. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and you're not having to redo this on every single site.
Right. So same thing for, here we go. We got archive, author archive, footer, header we could talk about. I have a video coming on that soon. Maybe I'll wait on that one. Search results, no search results, a single post template, my policies, which I do kind of differently in here. All of these are things I've themed out. So here's my default archive. It's a card with an image and a title and some text. Like every website I'm going to make isn't going to look exactly like this, but it's probably generally going to have this structure. You know what I mean? It's going to be a card. It's going to have an image. It's going to have a heading.
Yep.
So I could go ahead and kind of theme that out in here and be okay. Author archive, I've probably spiced that up a little bit more than the rest of these because I don't want them to be overly opinionated design-wise, but it's got the author's image here, the author name, the author bio, and then all of their posts are in cards that completely match the cards from this archive. Footer, I absolutely hate designing footers. It's my least favorite thing in the world. I'm terrible at it, and it drives me insane. So a while back, I ended up making 3 different footers. So in here, we can see here's footer 1. This is like the most complex one that has like multiple columns with links and all that. We have number 2, which is a more dumbed down version, a more simplified one. This is probably the one that ends up getting used the most on the projects I'm working on. And then the last one is like the very, very plain Jane one that just has a couple links in the copyright. So essentially, I have 3 footers to choose from when I start a new project. If there's not already a design done, I'll just grab the one that I think is going to work the best, delete the other 2, and then just tweak it however I need.
That's something that I need to do because I always build the footer from the ground up, and it's super annoying. But they look like one of those first 2 pretty much always. It's like,
yeah.
If it's a complex site, it's the top one. If it's a basic, Joe the plumber site, it's number 2.
Right. There's this website, sasspages.xyz. I use this a lot because you can drill this down by like section type, and then you can see a bunch of SaaS sites and what they're doing. So in here, they have footers, I'm sure somewhere, footers. And then you can see all these different footers from a bunch of SaaS companies. I like this because I think SaaS companies spend a lot of time on design. So I went through here and just found, the couple that I thought looked good and then put them into my, rebuilt them inside my starter site. Okay, search results. So this one I actually spent quite an embarrassingly long amount of time on. By default, I've gone ahead and put the search icon inside of my header. I feel like if I go to a website and I've never been there before and I'm looking for something specific, I always go straight for the search button, like always. I never navigate through their navigation. How about you?
It depends on what kind of site it is. Like there's some conventions that I'm going to expect, like depending on what I'm looking for. If I just want to find their contact info, I'm going to go to either about or contact. But that's for a small site, then well, quite honestly, what I would actually do is probably search Google with their website URL and what I'm looking for, because their site search is probably going to be terrible and not actually return what I want. So I don't know. I don't typically lean on that.
I use it quite a bit when I go visit websites. Obviously, I'm not practicing what I preach, Taylor. I get your point here. But I do feel like it's probably something that I've really underused as far as like building out websites, because it does make it really easy for people to just try to find what they need, right? So I tried to spend a little bit of time on this. Obviously, like the search functionality in WordPress isn't the greatest. I get that, but it will generally return something that's useful, right? However, the default styles inside of GeneratePress when you just install this, I don't love. So I basically had to do all of this with CSS, which we scrolled through inside my styles.css file. But this is kind of their new modal system for search that just got introduced, I think, in the last update. So we have this here as search. And if I search for dashboard, we go to the search results page when it has results. And I've tried to like not too opinionated design this, but design it in a way that could be easily adapted for any site. And I basically stole this layout from Google because we're already real used to how Google shows us search results. So here's the search bar, which is going to be persistent on the search results page, search results for, and we have whatever the title of the page is going to be, whatever this search query was. And then here's all their search results. If there were more pages, obviously it would list out more pages here. But I've just done this with a text link and an excerpt here, essentially. But I feel like at least this layout is going to be familiar no matter what. Anybody could use this and understand how to use it, right? And if I just put in junk here, it's going to have no search results found. And I literally just stole this from Google here. What happens if you don't have enough search results? I figured if it's good enough for Google, it's good enough for me, and I'm not too worried about them coming after me. So
yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so spend a bunch of time on that. Now, this is easy. Like if I don't want this to happen, I just take it out in the customizer. I just turn it off, no big deal. But obviously, we don't have to worry about like end users doing this very much. But if I go to a WordPress website and I'm trying to find something specific, I'll always just go up here and type $S equals and then do a search. Like I do that literally I'm sure every day on WordPress websites trying to find something. So if anybody out there is like me, at least if I'm hiding search, but somebody does a search anyways, at least the results are going to be decent looking out of the box, you know?
That's really funny. I never do that.
Oh man, that is a good hack. It makes it so easy to find stuff. All right, single post. So again, something as non-opinionated as I could get. In fact, we can just go look at, I have like a dummy post in here. Here's what it looks like on the front end. Headline, excerpt, author, featured image, text. Basically stole the layout from Medium. I figure if Medium is doing well with this layout, it's probably fine with me. This looks decent. If the purpose of the website wasn't blogging, but they happen to have 1 or 2 blog posts on here, this would totally suffice. Obviously, most times I'm probably redesigning this to match with the brand, but this is a great starting point for me.
It's simple. Let the giant corporations spend the hundreds of thousands of dollars on QA and research, and then we can just glean what they come up with.
Steal like an artist, right?
There are no such thing as original ideas.
That's right. And it's not like what they've done here is revolutionary. It's just a skinny box,
Yeah.
They don't even have the image wider here. I added that flare, so I'm not exactly stealing from them.
How many pieces of flare do you have?
Right. I also have one for like policies, which I don't really have this on my list. Maybe it comes up a little bit when we start talking about PHP, but all my snippets in there. I've set up a custom post type for policies. I'm trying to use custom post types more and more and more for more things in here for organization purposes and to be able to query them across the site and all that. Policies is something I know I'm going to add to every page or every project. So I've just created a custom post type for policies. If we go in there, I have a default privacy policy in here, and I have the template for what those are going to look like out of the box, which is as plain Jane as we could possibly make it. So I think that covers all the templating type stuff.
The policies thing would be for like privacy policy, terms of service, stuff like that.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I mean, I just figured those are 99.9% of the time, those are going into every site. So I feel pretty good about going ahead and just baking this into my starter site.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And yeah, Taylor has a good point here. Like, I bet you if you went to like 99% of the sites I've developed over the years, like I never went and did anything about the 404 or the author archives or any of that. It's like all stock generate press stuff, which is fine. Like I said, it's not a big deal, but I feel like the hour or 2 I spent creating all those templates here and assigning them to the right places and all that, I feel like they're better defaults now, and they're probably better going to match whatever I end up designing on the website. And they're like linked to all my font styles and colors and all those kinds of things in a way that's more coherent and like connected into everything else than the default generate press ones were.
Especially if you're using a builder like Bricks or Oxygen, where they leave literally everything up to you, then having this sort of starter site is super critical for things like that. If there's no 404 page, it just is a blank page with nothing on it. Like, couldn't be any more jarring. At least a theme like this, there's something to start off with, but then you've just made it better.
Yeah. And I just tried to, like I said, I tried to make it look a little bit nicer and obviously like keep that consistency throughout there. All right. Last thing I got in here is all the customizations I've done through my, through different functions, essentially. So what we'll do is we'll just pop this open here. I tried to earmark a few of them that I thought might be interesting. But this is something that's, I don't think there was anything in my previous starter sites as far as any tweaks like this, any PHP snippets. And now I have an ass ton of them in here. So, editor styles. This is essentially just, these are 2 snippets that enqueue the styles.css, this style sheet in my child theme, and the customizer CSS into the editor. They don't work 100% of things, but they make the back end look a whole lot closer to the front end than it does by default.
And that enables your like grid class to work in the builder, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And same thing, like if I will try to, all my finalized CSS goes in the child theme style sheet, but as I'm like developing and ideating and working on things, I'll do all that in the customizer so I can kind of see a live preview as I'm doing it. So this will enqueue all that customizer CSS into the editor too. I say all, it doesn't work 100% of the time. Like the editor styles in there sometimes are way too strict for me to figure out how to override them with my CSS. So I give up on some things. I add categories to pages.
I saw that.
So I've done this for a couple reasons, but it does give you the ability to query things if you need to, like by or be able to bring things up by categories. But I was using this for quite a while. I had some different like page layouts, and then I could like create a layout category inside pages, and then use taxonomies, basically check boxes to show this layout or that layout. So it's kind of a hangover from that. I don't know how much I'll continue to use that, but it's in there. Another thing that's part of posts but not part of pages are excerpts. I found this to be handy because I am building in all the search stuff by default. I'm showing the excerpt for the page in the search results. So I wanted to be able to have a place to put an excerpt for pages as well as post. So I'm not relying on just like the first few words of the page to show up as the excerpt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
This one is super annoying to me. Reusable blocks are a great part of the block editor. And they've even got better now with the way they've kind of reframed the way synced and non-synced blocks work. But you have no way to get to your reusable blocks section easily. So this little snippet of code basically puts the menu over here for reusable blocks. So now if I click on that, I can see all my patterns right in here, which is great. So that was a nice little one I stole from somewhere.
You don't enjoy going 8 clicks deep to get to that menu?
No, like why this isn't here in the first place, I don't know, but it's there now for me. I forget that that's not default. I've tweaked my hamburger menu. I don't know why. I guess just because I want to make it look cooler. Instead of 3 bars, it's just 2 bars, and they're a little slimmer. I just like the way it looks better than the default one. So that's some
more flair
and functions you have to put in there. I created a default user role for what I'm calling like business owners. So this is the login I give all my clients, which essentially it's the editor role in here, but it's not going to allow them to go in and change the theme or install plugins or things like that. Now, this is a tough one because there are a lot of bad actors out there that would hold clients hostage and say like, I'm not going to let you take your site or whatever. I know I'm never going to do that. Like if a client wants to leave, I will give them admin access and they can have it. And now I could get hit by a bus, I guess. But I'm trying to save clients from themselves. I'm not trying to lock them out of their website or not allow them to have things. Like my clients don't want to fuck up their site.
Mm-hmm.
And this keeps them out of the areas where they could easily fuck up the site by just clicking the wrong thing, right? So I've created that user role. I did decide to do a custom user role, so I'm not messing with like the default ones that are in there in case somebody comes after me and doesn't understand why like this one works different than that one, whatever. I just tried to create its own custom one. So it was completely separated. Just did a video on this fairly recently. Is basically a front end dashboard for clients. So this is built into my starter site as well. If you want to figure out how I did this, there's a video about it on my channel. You can go search. It's fairly recent. But this function in here will redirect anybody who's not an admin to this dashboard instead of the backend dashboard when they log in. So instead of getting thrown back here where they might not fully understand, this is a little bit cleaner for them. They can add blog posts, pages, media. They can view their analytics. I have video tutorials for them on here. They can send in a support request, and if they're feeling great, they can even leave me a review. But basically, this little snippet in here redirects people to that to this dashboard instead of the backend dashboard. And if they go in here to like edit post or whatever, they click edit post, they end up in the backend. If they click dashboard again, it actually redirects them to this dashboard instead of the dashboard we're used to on the back end.
Oh, cool.
And that's just done by like all admins still get the normal access, but anybody who's not an admin gets sent to this as the dashboard instead. We'll see. This is new in my setup. but I really like it so far. We'll just see if I don't confuse the hell out of clients with it. I don't know yet.
That's actually an interesting idea because I mentioned I do, a lot of white label stuff. I do a lot of work for like homeowners agencies and homeowners like associations and, like private portals and stuff. And so they always need the ability to add documents and, posts and stuff essentially from the front end. So it's really convoluted to do that. Whether you're using like a form plugin or ACF extended, it's kind of a pain, but that approach is interesting because it almost feels like there's an element of reinventing the wheel when you're doing front end post editing and access, whereas this approach kind of, I haven't thrown a client at it, so who knows what they'll break or blow up as they just click around in there, but that's really interesting. I like that approach a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's fairly new to my setup, but I like that I can kind of tailor the experience for them. Obviously, this looks a whole lot prettier, which is not important at all, but for whatever reason, I get hung up on that. But being able to put like video tutorials and stuff for them in here, if I need to, them being able to send support requests. I doubt they'll ever use this, but it's here. And I'm already installing Fluent Forms on the website. So there's a generic form already installed, like a support form that's going to show me the username and the URL this was submitted from. So they don't even have to fill in their name or anything when they submit this form, but I'll see on the other end who submitted it. So hopefully those are cool little tweaks for them. But like I said, some of that's kind of yet to be tested on my end so far. All right, let's see. We got through that. Branding and attribution. So these are just vanity things down here in the bottom. This says website by Ogle Web Design rather than like thank you for using WordPress or whatever it normally says.
Is that your next company, Ogle Van Dusen?
Yeah, I guess I can't talk, man. Shit. And then like if we go view the source code, I have another one here that says like built by Kyle Van Dusen at Ogle Web Design. Looking for WordPress friends, join the admin bar, which is just kind of a fun thing to put in sites. So the only people that are ever going to see this obviously are other developers. So I don't know, it kind of felt like putting my signature on the website here. And then obviously if anybody's looking at this, they're a developer. So maybe they come hang out with us at the admin bar.
So I'm curious with these sorts of tweaks, what percentage of your clients actually get into their site and do things?
It depends. Like, I mean, I have some clients that are like, they're in the WordPress space. So they're in their website all day, every day, then I have some clients that are Joe the plumber type people that are never in there. So it kind of runs the gamut. So yeah, I guess there's some of these things would be more useful than others.
I was just curious. Yeah. Cause I would say for me, it's a pretty even split too. It's probably 50-50. Yeah. And the ones that do get in, they do about this much. And that's it.
Yeah, I have some that do more because I've done some more websites for like people in the WordPress industry. So they're obviously they're probably better at using WordPress than I am. So obviously they can come in here and do whatever they want. And I'm for those clients, I'm not gonna like set up this dashboard and redirect and give them like a business owner role. Like, I don't know, they know what they're doing. I'm not worried about this. This is probably more of a setup for like the Joe the plumber that wants to get in and upload blog posts. Like I have some nonprofits that basically the only thing they do is go in and upload their newsletter as like a blog post. So once a month they're getting in there and adding a new blog post. So this kind of setup would be good for somebody like them. They log in, they can add a new blog post. They're in and out. They don't have to look at a whole lot of it.
That makes sense. Yep.
99.999% of the time, I'm not using comments on websites. So this just defaults to removing all the comments and stuff out of there. Okay, so this one, I could almost name some of these things after specific clients. Some client wanted to add a video to their webpage, and they like emailed me the video, of course, and I just said, hey, we need to host this video somewhere, and then I'll embed it on the website. And I gave them options on how we could do that. We can do it free through YouTube, but it's going to show ads and it's going to suggest videos at the end, or we could use a paid service like, Vimeo, or I use bunny.net or whatever. And, here's the benefits to that, but we'd have to pay for it, whatever. Well, they just decided to log in and start uploading all the videos to their website and like, screw you, Kyle, you don't know anything. So they uploaded a ton of videos to their website, and then we're trying to send a bunch of traffic to it. And I've just not really set up all these hosting accounts for like streaming a bunch of videos. So I just went in here and added something here that's going to disable video upload from the media library. I could go disable that if I need to upload a video, but it's just going to keep them from like clogging up their server with some huge video or something. Shortcodes, I try to not mess with shortcodes too much, and I actually have a system that will replace this now, so this is something that I could probably get rid of, but I needed to use shortcodes to like work with my search results templates, so I have some shortcodes in there. Block patterns, that's not really that important. Remove the attachment pages for images because I don't really need those in there. I'm removing the date archive pages because I really don't see a point in having a bunch of archives for dates on most sites I'm building. Post formats, that must have been a thing before I came into WordPress because like I've never used those different formats for posts, so I'm just disabling it in here.
Me either. I mean, I started using it in 2014, and even then I didn't use it.
Before I created the entire new front end dashboard, I did go through and disable all the default dashboard widgets. I just don't think any of them are really useful to clients, and it's like the first thing you see when you log in, and I've just kind of left it in there. This will also, like when you don't have any dashboard widgets in there, it will have like the dotted outline of where some go and like a call to action to like add a widget. So I'm also hiding that as well. This redirects people to the new dashboard. Hiding the admin bar from non-admin users. I can't tell you how many clients have gotten confused thinking that's part of their website when they do log in. So I'm just hiding the admin bar from them completely. Last login time. So this might have some like performance implications or like database bloat that I might not be thinking of here. But I've had a couple times when like I needed to see when my client logged in. So this like little last login time just adds a field here that shows the last time this user logged in, which has come in handy for me several times. So it kind of earned a spot inside my starter site.
Come in handy as like I got in and couldn't do this, so you're like catching them in a lie, or what do you mean?
Yeah, like, hey Kyle, this thing randomly changed. I haven't been in the site in months, and this randomly broke. And then I go look, and it's like, you've been logged in all day today. You know,
Gotcha.
So sometimes it's just nice to know I've never been able to get in the site. Well, I see that you've logged in like last week or whatever. You know, it's kind of, I guess, to catch them in lies, but also to debug issues if I need to.
It sounds so much like coming out of high school doing IT tech support, and you're like, "What's the password?" And they're like, "I don't have a password."
Yeah. I was talking with Elijah yesterday, and he's talking about he used to do IT for like people 60 plus or something. I'm like, God, what are you, a masochist? Like not only IT, but IT for old people. There's no freaking way.
Oh man, it's so funny. I think that's why him and I get along so well. So we understand the same tech support woes.
Yeah,
I mean, it's no different than trying to do like tech support for client website stuff. It's just with they don't know to double click instead of to single click kind of thing.
All right, login page, another vanity thing here. I'm zoomed way in. I've just cleaned up the way the login page looks. I think this looks so much nicer than the standard login page. This can be tweaked to like match brand colors and stuff if you need to. I typically just leave my information on there so it shows the Ogle logo when they log in and not their logo, but you could go in and swap this out. I've shared this code somewhere. I can look that up and add a link later, but I've like left comments all throughout this to explain what all these different bits of code do. And the last thing, I'm not going to show all this because it's a paid product, but this is a video I just did earlier this week on this template tag system that Taylor Drayson came up with, which allows you to use options pages inside of generate blocks. It allows you to like inline dynamic data. You can bring in query strings. You can bring in user meta, author meta. You can create your own hooks. You can do a whole bunch of shit with this. So if you want to understand a little bit more about that, there's a video recently on the channel that talks about like unlocking a bunch of dynamic data stuff. That's what this does. So that's in there as well. And that brings me to the conclusion of everything I was going to talk about. And my throat is killing me already because I feel like I've nonstop talked forever. So now you have to talk for a second.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that are just like quality of life upgrades that I would be interested in. Like the login page, I pretty much only changed the logo to the client logo, and that's pretty much it. The post formats and comments and stuff like that, I typically am just going to settings and discussion and ticking it such that they can basically never leave a comment and it doesn't get, you know, approved for any reason. But yeah, there's so many different things. And I was sitting here thinking like, man, how did you kind of like amass all this? And it's like, well, I guess really it's just over the course of many, many years and many different situations that arise, like needing last login time. I've never thought about that, but maybe it would be
like, you know, your contract always evolves. Like clients come up with new ways to do the most insane shit. And you're like, I never want that to happen again. So I'm going to put a new clause in my contract. And you're right. That's like how a lot of this stuff, not allowing them to upload video or whatever. Like some of these are just like, I never want this situation to happen again. So I'm going to prevent it here. But as you know, me and you and some other Generate Blocks people have a little messenger thread that's been going for, I don't know, maybe a year now.
Wow.
But we're all constantly sharing, you know, tweaks and things we're coming up with. So a lot of that has just grown from those conversations of like, oh, this is super cool and I could use this inside my starter site. So there's very few things in here that I like sat down and said, I'm going to build a starter site now. And like, what do I want in it? A lot of it's just kind of over time. And I think the hard part is knowing what not to put in there because you get so carried away. And maybe I have gotten too carried away. There's probably a Kyle in September of 2024 that's doing a live stream saying, well, my last starter site had way too much in it. And this year I've really simplified things. Like that's definitely a possibility. I'm not gonna pretend that's not, but I just tried to keep the mindset of like, I don't want to put anything in here that I have to remember to go take out. Like I should only put things in that are, you know, 99.99% of the time going to stay, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's really like something I'm thinking about because like I mentioned, I'm intentional in having almost nothing. My starter site is super basic, but that's also there's a too far in both ends of the spectrum, I think, where there are some things that I am reinventing the wheel on each time. Like the colors and typography system would be far, far easier to manage. But then also I've said on many of my live streams, like I want to basically think about nothing when it comes to typography and colors and those sorts of things, which I don't currently have. So your system is, you know, very, very intriguing from that perspective. Taylor's comment is super funny. How many people are going to have websites that say built by Ogle Web Design in the source code from people copying this? Mine probably will.
Well, I know somebody asked earlier about like making this available. I've struggled with that. Not that I don't want to share. I'm totally down with sharing.
It's just that your implementation is not for everybody. Like there are many things in yours that I won't be implementing, but there are a few items that absolutely would.
Yeah. And there's also like there's premium stuff built in here, right? And then there's a bunch of stuff that's like, okay, this would cause support issues. There's also a lot of code in here that I had ChatGPT help me write. And like, do I want to be responsible for saying, hey, this is good to use? A lot of that, like redirect people when they log into the dashboard or don't let them upload video. Like I just relied on ChatGPT to do that. So I'm not sure that I want to go give that out. If there's specific stuff in here that was like, you're really curious about adding, let me know in the comments and I'll see about some stuff I might be totally cool to share. And then some stuff I might be a little bit more picky, not because I don't want to share, but because I'm trying to think of like all the implications of doing that.
Yeah, there's quite a few. The CSS would be safe, but yeah, those custom functions in particular would be pretty tricky.
Yeah, I can say use at your own risk. That's a great point. And I get that until you've ever done that and you have a public facing email address or you're on Facebook Messenger and you get bombarded with support requests. Like I get support requests pretty regularly from this tiny YouTube channel. Like every week I get several people writing me asking for like help on this specific thing. And, you know, I try to help as much as I can, but, you know, I can't stop down to like do an hour of support on something I gave out for free on YouTube, you know? So it's nice to say like use at your own risk, or like I'm not going to do support or whatever, but you're going to get those requests and then you're going to be a jerk for saying no. So it's kind of hard.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, we'll wrap it up here.
Very awesome. I appreciate that in-depth tour. It's given me a lot to think about, and there are certainly pieces, like I said, that I'm going to be pulling in and implementing in my own flair.
I would be very interested to see what you take away from this, like which things were interesting to you. So I appreciate you coming on here and helping me out with this. Like I said, to anybody watching this, if I saw several questions about like how does this work in GeneratePress, GenerateBlocks. If you're curious about getting started with GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks, there's a link down in the description to Jonathan's course. It's absolutely fantastic. I know tons of people in our community have gone through it and learned how to use GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks through it. I've also put my 13-year-old son through it, and he can now build websites using GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. So if it's good enough for a 13-year-old to pick it up, I have total faith that you will do really well going through it. So definitely go check that out. Like I said, there's a affiliate link down there and a non-affiliate link. So you pick whichever one makes most sense for you.
Thanks for the shout out.
Absolutely.
Always a great time.
And Jonathan's also, I'll make sure, I don't think I put it inside the video description, but Jonathan's got a great YouTube channel with lots of great content on there as well. So if you're watching here, you would definitely enjoy being subscribed to Jonathan's channel as well. So, all right. Happy Friday, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Until next time.
We'll talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye.